All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's me and Jack McClunty to look after you today. It's Tuesday, the 6th of February?
Yep.
6th of February. Well, we got a lot of stuff to get to today. We got Democracy 101 coming up in a short while. We'll be talking to the authors of this book, which is pretty amazing. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yep.
Exactly that one.
Yep.
So you got the different scenarios of South Africa and how it could all play out during and post the election. Let's speak to Ray Hartley and Greg Mills about what exactly they've plotted as our scenarios going forward.
Yeah, or at least what they've seen in their crystal ball.
Right.
Yep.
So I just want to start off with something else. And really something that's hit us quite hard here at CliffCentral. We have a small staff. There only a couple of us, and we all kind of check in on each other, and we know what everybody's up to. And when we go out and do stuff, we do it together. And there's this team that's been going out under Jack and Bafana and Aaron and Duma, and they were working hard last week. They were at all these different places all across the country with VVIP, kind of asking young people what they're doing, whether they're voting, whether they're registered, what they might be thinking of for the future of their country. And one of the people on that team, and one of the people who's been on our CliffCentral team now for some time is Aaron Homolemo. I call him because he had like Aaron AA, AJ Homolemo. Yeah, this guy was just like a really positive, amazing guy to work with. And I was in the office yesterday, and I heard that he'd been missing from Saturday night, and that they'd put out a missing persons report, and everybody was really tense and anxious, hoping to find out what was going on there. We got the really bad news yesterday that he'd been in a car accident on Saturday night and that he hadn't made it.
Yeah. Which
is a horrible thing. I know it happens all the time in this country. I know it happens all over the world. You have accidents, who knows what actually happens unless you were there to watch it. And I don't know any of the details. I just know that this guy was on his way to make even bigger mark on the world.
Definitely.
Talented and really creative, clever, energetic, lovely human being, and just taken from us way too soon.
Yep.
And because we're a small crew, it's hit us all pretty hard. I mean, Jane was crying yesterday. Simpiwe, who knew him the best out of all of us. The reason that we even got to know Aaron was because Simpiwe used to catch a lift with him in the mornings.
Yeah.
And then he kind of became part of the team, and before we knew it, he was running most of the technical setup here for us. So it's been a very tough couple of hours since Sunday, when we realized he wasn't answering calls or messages, and as I said, I don't know any detail, and I don't know if I really want to. It's not going to make me feel better. It's not going to make many of us feel better, and my heart goes out to his family, and to all who knew him. Very special guy, and keep going, dude. You've got a long journey still to go, and you can forge a path for the rest of us.
Yeah. It's there really isn't anything right to say at a time like this. It's just we go through the emotions on a day-to-day basis, and I think it's just about finding the strength within just to keep going, as much as it sucks, when someone like that passes on, you'd wish that you could like stop time a little bit just so you could compose yourself and get shit together so that you can keep on going. But unfortunately, time waits for no man. So we'll just keep pushing in his memory. But what a guy, what a gent. It's really unfortunate.
He made his mark. I mean,
definitely.
He was here for a while with us, but he was already he put up this video. I watched it last night. He put up this video that he made here on Friday.
Yeah,
like just walking around the office and walking around the garden and all of that stuff.
In all white, he looked so dope that day. He looked absolutely amazing.
Yeah, something I know that we project back
Yeah.
onto things what we want to feel, and we attach importance to things that at the time are not made with any desire to indicate, like, someone knows something that they shouldn't know.
Sure.
But it does feel kind of bizarre that there's this big hole now.
Yeah.
I walked past his desk yesterday, and I'm like,
on Saturday night, actually, because we had started this culture of sending each other cool TikTok videos that we come across, and I hadn't opened it until like Sunday morning. By which point we started panicking because he was supposed to be with us when we went to Maponya Mall, and we couldn't get a hold of him, which was uncharacteristic of him. So yeah, Sunday was tough. Yesterday was even worse. But unfortunately, we have to keep going.
and if you did know him and you were lucky enough to have known this guy, you'll know that we're going to miss him.
Yep.
He's going to leave a big gap in all of our lives. Anyway, we have to get on with it. We've got to do some work this morning. We've got people to talk to and things to get to, and there's plenty of news that we have to also pay attention to today. So first thing is, apparently BUSA that's Business Unity South Africa. I'm never sure with all of these different organizations which one is which.
Neither
which
am
one
I.
actually wields any power, which one doesn't.
Mhm.
All I know is that BUSA is under the leadership of Cas Kuvadia at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's a name that you should recognize. The CEO of BUSA said the organization doesn't oppose equal access to quality universal healthcare, but said to the president, can you just hold off on this NHI bill?
Who hasn't told the president to hold off on this thing?
He seems to not be interested in listening because the president probably knows deep down inside this is the last time that the ANC will be able to pass legislation without another party.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they won't have a majority.
Yeah.
So
That's for sure.
it's very much more difficult for them to make law. I think the president is digging his heels in. So is party. This is what they want to do. They want to push this, steamroll this thing through so they can say to the electorate just before the election, oh, but look, we brought you the NHI. Which, I mean, who believes that they're going to administer this well? They've screwed up everything else they've touched, but this will be the one.
Yeah, like their track record does not bode well for them to try do something of this magnitude. And it's just really ill-advised. We are as a country, we're not in a position to actually get this thing going. It's
a disaster.
It's an absolute disaster.
Yeah, really. To have the people who have mismanaged every other aspect of our lives in this country, to have those people now put in charge of our health as well.
No.
Terrible idea.
Absolutely.
Anyone who has been to a public government hospital in the last, 10, 15 years, it's become particularly bad.
Yep.
Then you tell me if you would like those people to run all the rest of it as well.
No, thank you. I'll say that with my chest. No, thank you. And look, we all understand that medical costs are pretty
expensive.
It is.
But this government is not going to be able to reduce those costs.
They aren't the solution. Definitely not.
If anything, they'll add to it so they can fatten themselves up
even more
and take a slice of the pie. It's bad enough. I know lots of people are very suspicious of medical aids because they look at it and they go, well, they're charging me this huge amount of money every month, and it is expensive. Even if you go with the most basic of medical plans, it's expensive.
Yes.
And you're taking that insurance out so that if you have an emergency, if you need urgent medical care, that you are covered, because God forbid you should have no cover. But they wonder what happens to all this money. And then the medical aids, bad as they are, you at least are part of a scheme where you can go and you can argue with them, you can fight with them, you can, and most of the time, I say with reservation, but most of the time they'll look after you. But the government, even worse.
No.
You really think they're going to do a good job?
Come on.
I don't see it happening. So it really bothers me that the president is in such a hurry to win a political goal here. And I don't know if it will be such a big goal, because for the people who don't already have something, what's going to make this the thing?
I wonder.
You know, it's like suddenly what? They don't have any advantages now. And if the bill comes, it'll only start actually affecting their lives if it goes ahead. Let's say it's perfect and the government's wildest dreams come true and everything runs exactly according to their plans, which are sketchy, but let's imagine it all somehow miraculously works out. It'll only start affecting people in any which way within 2-3 years from now. So there's no real political score here.
Yeah, it's just
it's not going to change anybody's life.
It's smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
And genuinely, I feel like they've seen the writing on the wall, and this is just for show. This is simply just so they have some
it's exactly right. It's
calling card that they can have once they go out campaigning in front of people and say, hey, by the way, we've also got this new thing that won't work, just like everything else. Like, how about you get my electricity on? Let's start there. Like, can we do that, please?
Why don't you guys do something that you screwed up so you can fix, like the electricity situation?
Please, can we just have that?
And less cholera in our drinking water would be nice.
Oh my God.
All right. So the Senzo Miua trial, I had the most fascinating conversation with Pumi the other day after the show. It was last Thursday. And we sat in the lounge here and she was telling me her theory about what happened.
Okay.
With the Senzo Miua trial. And there's so many theories bubbling around on social media. We don't need to
add on to them.
No, and I don't know enough. And I kind of, at some point, I just zoned out.
Truth be told, I was really invested, most probably because I'm an Orlando Pirates fan through and through. And perhaps for the first 6 months after his death, I was like, they need to find who killed our number one.
You'd think so.
And then 6 months turned into a year turned into 2 years turned into 8. And I'm like, guys, what are we doing? And now that I think about it, in a couple of days, it'll be a year since AKA got killed.
Yeah.
And
still waiting for that one to be resolved.
Nothing's going on over there.
I don't think there's been a single arrest.
No, not one. We don't know if they have any leads, any credible leads.
No, there's no desire to.
Nothing.
There's no one's interested in solving this because there are a bunch of people involved who are dangerous. So people would rather just, and with Senzo Miua, as I understand it, again, this is not. I'm not going to paraphrase Pumi because I don't want to misquote her when she was quite specific about what she thought had happened. But there's a whole lot of scenarios that are now starting to play out, and again. You can't fool everybody all of the time.
Yep. So
there are powerful people like Chico Twala involved in all of this. Ivan Koza must have been, this is one of his players. At the time, it must have. One of those calls right after it happened must have been to Ivan Koza.
Yeah.
And these are people who can make things happen.
Yeah.
And who have incredible influence on police, ministers, the president. These are not like people on the side who haven't, have to go whichever way the wind blows.
Yeah.
And then there's Kelly Kumalo and there's her mother, and it was at the mother's house, and there are witnesses who don't make sense, and then there are police who don't make sense. And then there are these criminals who've kind of said it was us who would be in jail anyway for a long time. It seemed like convenient scapegoats for whoever really did it.
Yeah.
It's all very, very messy. So I don't know what to make of this. And I'd be the wrong person to give you any kind of.
Same here. I haven't been keeping up with it for a very, very long time. Because, truth be told, I always think about how these very public situations have ramifications for the people that are not in the public sphere. So if a case like that, where you've got someone getting killed in a room filled with people, and it takes 8 years to prosecute the case, what happens to me when I'm on a street in Netherlands?
So it's thrown away.
Like, you get what I mean?
Yeah, it just gets thrown away. Sorry.
So
forget about it.
It does not make me feel any more comfortable being in this country, thinking that if anything were to happen to me, God forbid, that I would be able to lean on the justice system to get me some sort of justice. Like at this point in time, honestly, we need a complete overhaul from top to bottom.
Well, I see a long comment here on the NHI bill from Victor Zigalala. It's the first time he's been in the comments, so I'm not sure if he's joining us for the first time this morning or if he is being sent here by the politicians to try and stand. South Africa has the best primary healthcare system in the world, he says.
Okay.
Okay, but then he goes on to say that the hospital stories we see in the media are sensational incidents. So all those people who queue up at Chris Hani Baragwanath, that's all just made up by the media.
When was the last time he
the
went
people
there?
who are, well, I don't know, but even if his personal experience is different, that doesn't mean that everybody else is lying.
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
I use the primary healthcare system. I'm always impressed when, God forbid, I go to the hospital. Well, okay, lucky you. You've had a good experience. It's like, some people have luck of the draw. I had a very good experience with the Metro Police the other day.
Yeah.
So I mentioned it on the show because it's such a rare thing. He says, I even used the Wits dentistry department, blown away by the state of the facilities as well as the diverse medical staff that attended to me. Okay, please do a show where you actually have to go through the primary healthcare system as a South African citizen. Hey, we're not journalists, dude, but there are journalists who are doing this already. The beauty is that medication consultation is free. You just have to invest your time. There is no such thing, Victor. This proves to me that you're not very smart. There is no such thing as free. Someone somewhere is paying for something.
Yep.
There is no such thing as free. And if you think it's free, then you are the idiot.
Because you're going to need to pop out like $200-300 to get a file opened and all of that kind of stuff.
And there are people somewhere who are paying for it.
Yeah, one way or another.
All it is they're taking money from here and moving it to there. It doesn't come from nowhere. There is nothing you can zero rate with no cost to.
Yeah.
Someone's paying for the doctors, someone's paying for the medicine, someone's paying for the building, someone's paying for the facilities, the equipment. And if it isn't you, Victor, lucky you, it isn't you. But you know what? It's someone else. It's probably me and Jack, actually.
It could be.
We're subsidizing you.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm very happy you had a good time, but just keep in mind that's not everyone's experience. In fact, they've got tons of horror
but also
stories.
This idea of their like lived experience. So now we must take your lived experience as the truth, but we must ignore
everything else.
So the journalists are all in cahoots. They've got together. There's a big conspiracy theory. Hundreds of people have all been told, we're going to make this primary healthcare system look bad. I mean, despite the fact that if you walk into any of these places as an individual, it is highly unlikely you'll have Victor's experience.
Very unlikely.
Okay.
Very unlikely.
It's amazing to me. He wants us to take his word for it, but he's not prepared to take the word of the people who actually have
done the research.
The job of going around to these places day by day, not looking at it as just a patient, looking at it for patients who are not having the best experiences. Anyway, the freeness is for the poor patients. I also pay my taxes. It's very pro-poor. Yeah, but the fact is that doesn't come from nowhere. So you're putting a strain on the system. And if something is free for someone, that means it's hugely expensive for someone else. So I don't understand are you not aware of the fact that you can rob Peter to pay Paul and you can rob Paul to pay Peter, but you can't pay them both out of nowhere, make money out of thin air.
Yeah.
So I think, Victor, it's nice to have you on the show for the first time. I'm sorry that we have to start with an argument. I hope you'll stick around, but you're not a very smart guy, I'm afraid.
Well, at least you're not showing your intelligence this morning.
Yeah, hopefully you can learn. And if you stick around on this show, you might end up saying more sensible things.
Let's hope so.
All right. In South Africa, says Ricky, the primary healthcare is disgusting. In fact, anything touched by government's disgusting. I worked as an auditor of municipalities with the Auditor General. Our government is very good at neglecting. And Mel says, go and see the maternity wards. It's a horror. Not enough beds, mom's birthing on the floors. See, now are you going to pretend these experiences are nonsense, Victor?
And those aren't journalists, by the way.
No, these are just like you, people who are listening to the show.
Yep.
Who've had experiences. If you want an honest look, says Slippery Pickle, at our healthcare system, Look at the people who can't speak. The death rate among newborn babies per capita will give you all the data you need. There's blood on the health minister's hands.
Definitely.
But he got something for free, so he's fine. Only thinking about himself. The EFF and the ANC's thinking is to drag everyone down to the lowest level, not to lift everyone to the highest level. Well, that's invariably what happens with systems that are formulated on the left, is let everybody suffer equally. We'll make it equally horrible for everyone in the country rather than try to make it better, because that requires an effort we don't want to put in.
Which is low frequency thinking. It's the reason. Yeah, and it's the reason why we are in the position that we are in. And when you look at the size of these people,
and because we have a government of the lowest hanging fruit, so we have people who are not very good at anything being given jobs because they're connected to other people.
That cater deployment.
Yeah.
So, it's that cater deployment. And I mean, if you are playing favors with the country and positions and all of that.
Oh, wait, we're going to say goodbye to Victor. And I'm so glad, because I actually don't have time for this. It says, wow, such privilege talk. You can't spell privilege properly, but that's not surprising. Gareth, you're such a privileged idiot. I don't know why it's a problem to be, what's privilege? It's to grow up where to grow up with parents who love you, to grow up with some resources so you're not starving.
Yep.
To be able to get yourself an education, the ability to maybe start your own business. I think that's good. I'm not embarrassed about privilege at all. I think privilege is amazing. And if I could pass on that privilege to other people, perfect. And I don't consider that an insult, Victor. So I know what kind of nonsense narratives you've been raised in, but that's not how it works. He says, what is wrong with you? Goodbye. Well, let's give him a minute to get out.
I mean, like,
no, this show's not for everybody. So
it really isn't. But the most alarming thing about Victor is that he mentioned a bunch of things and didn't like your response, and now he's thrown a fit and then he's gone.
Right.
So
and
anyway.
Sanele quite rightly says privilege is getting free healthcare, Victor. Well, it's not free because you, Sanele, and Jack and I, we've decided are paying for it. So, so bye, Victor.
Bye,
and,
Victor.
And take your free healthcare that we've given you. The rest of us in South Africa have paid for.
Yep.
And I hope you can get some kind of a brain transplant at some point, because maybe that'll be the healthcare that you really need.
Or just a severe ass whooping. Sometimes that helps. Seriously, sometimes you just need to knock some sense into someone's head. But I
had this conversation with someone the other day. I want to know what you think of this.
Yeah.
Is like we're so anti-bullying, right? And I don't know any guy, I can't speak on behalf of all the girls, but certainly I don't know any guy who wasn't a little bit bullied about something at school. This is what guys do, is they'll notice that you have a funny looking small toe. Yeah. And then you become,
listen,
the guy with a small toe, the funny small toe. You're a bit,
you're short. Just like me.
You're short.
There you go.
You even have it in your name.
Yeah.
You put it in your Twitter and Instagram name, Jack 5'4".
Yeah. I carry it as a badge of honor. Because here's what happened. I went to a boys' school, and I had to figure out where I stand on the pecking order. That's what bullying does. Someone showed up.
And they're different pecking orders.
There are different
you might be really good at sport.
Yep.
So you're at the top of that pecking order, but you're shitty in the classroom. So people call you stupid.
You could be extremely funny.
Yeah.
And perhaps you're not that great in class, but everyone enjoys being around you.
Right.
So in
Make
terms
people
of
laugh.
You get what I mean?
Right.
So people are a lot more willing to help you out in some of the things that you need to do. And then there are those that are physically dominating. So there are those that are at the top of the pecking order when it comes to physical altercations. So you typically stay out of those people's way. But every now and again, that person is going to try push you a little bit. And it's up to you whether you stand up to them or not.
And if you don't have the chance, so the reason I even brought this up is because I had this conversation with someone the other day. We've gone in a direction where we're anti-bullying, which is good. We don't want people being beaten up and made to feel like they are worthless and tormented and tortured at school. We don't want that. We don't want that in the workplace either. And I had a guest in at the end of last year who talked about bullying in the workplace. But the reality is, unless you get a little bit of bullying, you never develop the social skills to know when you've crossed a line. If you are
to know how to set up boundaries.
correct, if you're never equipped with the tools of feeling a little bit less than, ashamed, embarrassed, if you don't get those tools at school level, you will never develop them later on. So you will end up being impossible to work with. People won't like you, but they'll shut their mouths because adults are much more diplomatic than children. Like if children think you're being an asshole, children will say you're being such an asshole.
Yeah.
And then you will have to reform your behavior because otherwise you won't have friends at school. And you can survive much longer as an adult without friends than you can as a kid without friends. So you develop a bit of a social sensibility as a result of not only being loved and having friends and fitting in, but also when you're not included. I can tell you right now, I wasn't included in certain circles at school, and it taught me things. I don't regret any of it. I didn't go home crying every day because I was victimized. And I know there were some people who must have been.
Sure.
But there's a happy medium. So what we've done in society now is we've gone to the extreme of anti-bullying. And what we actually need is there's a little bit of bullying, a little bit of anti-bullying. Somewhere in the middle is
we need
healthy.
a balance.
And what I think has happened is that parents also think their kids are so fantastic and special and need to be protected the whole time. And these kids are just growing up in cotton wool and they're horrible people who no one wants to be around.
And they are these just soft pushover,
horrible kids.
No backbone, just noisy.
And
they throw
and
tantrums
terrible,
and it's just no one wants to be around them. It's terrible. And sometimes I wonder what kind of adults they're going to become, especially considering, as you're saying, like now it's gone to the complete anti-bullying thing. It's like, guys, truth be told, if you did not fall off your bicycle while you were trying to learn how to ride it, you wouldn't have continued learning how to ride it. Like it comes with the territory. Like it's just a fact of life, whether we like it or not. And if you're going to stop bullying in one way, trust me, kids are going to come up with a different way to bully you. And you're going to have to develop a thick skin at some point. You're going to have to develop the ability to stand alone when the moment calls for it. Sometimes you're not going to be accepted into all of the social circles, but that also teaches you how to stand on your own and be okay with it.
Yeah.
So
a couple of interesting comments from people. I thought this was an interesting one too. So Andre said, I had a leg operation at Steve Biko Hospital, received excellent service. I pay taxes, best value for my taxes ever received.
That's
so
great.
Let's just be clear about this. I think, we've spoken to a number of doctors over the years as part of what we do on the show when we engage with South Africans who are working in interesting places. There are a lot of tremendously hardworking, talented, and brilliant doctors. They are. And I'm talking about in the state system. Forget about private healthcare for a second. In the state system, there are.
And nurses, by the way.
Absolutely. And of course, there are going to be situations where people receive excellent healthcare.
Yep.
I'm just asking, are we going to trust the people who've mismanaged everything in the parastatals, who've mismanaged the government hospitals? And I'm talking about the administrators, not the doctors. Are we going to trust them now with one of the few things that really works in this country, which is private medical care? And remember, if you are one of these people who's very pro-poor, that nothing is for free. So guess where that's going to come from? It's going to be another burden on you as a taxpayer. They're going to take the money that you are saving as part of your medical health scheme.
Yep.
And they're going to then say, oh, well, you are not going to administer this, or the health scheme's not going to administer this. We as the government are. Just think about what that means for you, and then for your family, and then for the people you work with, and then for the people in the larger community that you're part of.
And please appreciate the fact that it's just a thought before it becomes a reality.
So Carl says he bullies his own children, so they get a nice thick skin early. I need them to be tough.
Yep.
It's gone a bit farther. My 7-year-old will tune you, bruh. You see. Mapello makes a good point. He says, worst kind of kid is the one who thinks that you're joking when you say no, because they're not used to hearing that word said to them. Yeah, I've met adults who obviously when they were children never heard the word no. And they are the most incorrigible adults to be around.
Yeah, but what I've figured out is when you kind of balk at them, they sit down. Seriously. Like I'm not the biggest human being on earth, but when the time comes, back? Yeah, you just push back just a little bit and see what happens.
Okay.
They'll be shocked. They'll be shocked in a deer in the headlights. That's what they look like.
Because they're not used to being.
Yes, like wait. How is he allowed to do that? What's going on? It's like, oh no. We don't play that shit over here.
Cheesy says, why don't they just integrate it into the private healthcare system and let them run it? Well, I think that's what Discovery were trying to convince the president to do, but who knows? Because they said they'll administer it.
Yeah,
they'll put it together. They'll be the ones who make it work. Gavin says, boys were ruthless, man. If you had big ears, your nickname forever would be Ura. Futa if you had big feet. Tanda if you had front teeth. These kids were close friends, and it was a badge of honor at times. Well, I mean, the other thing that has happened is that we've really set up educational facilities to work best for girls. And girls pay attention for longer. Girls like sitting in a classroom together.
They're more orderly.
Guys have excess energy. They get frustrated and irritated if they have to sit still for a long time. And you can see it because girls always get better results generally than guys do in academic situations, especially the way that we teach now. And at university, we have now a disproportionate system where there are more women at university than there are men.
Yep.
So if you talk to me about, again, that word that Victor brought up earlier, privilege, and men end up doing the hardest jobs. And by that, I mean night shift, dangerous jobs,
outside
construction jobs, outside jobs. So we talk a lot about how, there's a glass ceiling and women don't do as well. But we don't talk about that when it comes to the shitty jobs. We only talk about the good ones.
Yeah.
So it's like, how many female CEOs are there? And I'll say to you, well, how many women are there working on oil rigs? Zero. I don't hear you complaining and campaigning to be on oil rigs, ladies. So it's a funny thing that guys are, in so many ways, we've accommodated women to a degree which almost prejudices young men in schools and universities.
Yeah.
And yet we're still sold this bullshit story about, there's unequal pay, and, it's very unfair, and there aren't as many women in the C-suite, and there aren't as many women in, I don't know, CEO jobs in great big companies, or acting jobs, or whatever else it is. It's always the cool jobs, never the
it's never the not so glamorous stuff. Like, for argument's sake, you mentioned some of the jobs that are done outside, like in the sewers. I don't see too many women running to go do that. Bricklayers, I don't see too many women running to go and do that. You mentioned the oil rig earlier on. And
horrible jobs.
When you think about what happens on those kind of places, we were talking about bullying a couple of minutes ago, but like on an oil rig, the men there will test you. They're going to poke and prod at you up until
the reason
either break.
The reason I even brought that up is because guys and girls bond differently. And this is not some huge insight from me. This is obvious.
Yeah.
One of the ways that guys bond is we tease each other and we're rude to each other.
To see if you can take it.
Women are not. Women will be super nice to someone they hate.
Yeah.
And girls, don't get me wrong. This is not true for all ladies. And I know that, there are hard and fast kind of stereotypes which we should be avoiding. But there are some stereotypes that are true.
Yeah.
I know nothing sweeter than when some of the girls that I know see a girl that they hate and they talk to each other. It's syrupy. It's like they say, hi, oh my God, you look so amazing. I love your hair. I love your dress. Meanwhile, they hate each other.
Yep.
And guys are different. We will say we'll have the worst nicknames for our best friends.
Yeah.
And we'll be the rudest to the people we love the most. It's kind of like how guys, they kind of punch each other a little bit verbally. It's how we get along. And
it's
women see that and they're like, oh, that's so horrible. Why would you do that? Meanwhile, they're so dishonest about what they really think of.
Because
other girls.
I need to know that you can hang, Gareth. Like if shit hits
You're not
the
gonna
fan,
start crying and run away.
there you go. If shit hits the fan at any point in time, I need you to know that you're gonna do the handshake and then get to work. You know, like we don't have time for this. And when you think about it, men and women live considerably different lives. Like we don't look at things the same way.
Yeah.
So we're not going to express ourselves
That's
the same way.
That's why we're interested in each other.
There you go.
Different.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, we're not going to solve that problem this morning. One or two of the other things in the news. Apparently, Zanzibar is running out of beers. So Zanzibar and the other Spice Islands are facing a shortage of alcohol, which threatens the tourism sector. Tourism generates 90% of Tanzania's foreign revenue. Prices of beer have shot up almost 100% after the supply chain was disrupted by sudden change of importers.
Damn.
Island's tourism minister resigned recently, citing poor work conditions. Hey, at least their minister will resign when things go late. He's not doing the job properly, when the department is failing or something. He'll resign. When last did you hear of a government minister in our country resigning?
Has there ever been one? I can't like just the pure memory. I've got nothing.
I have a feeling Willem Kiezer did with that whole vibes thing, whatever it was, with the website.
He was pushed out. I don't think he willingly did it.
But anyway, doesn't matter. Neither here nor there. The hoteliers have warned that the problems over alcohol supply might make the island lose its tourism shine. Local manufacture of alcohol is banned in Zanzibar because they are largely a Muslim part of Tanzania. Most of the alcohol sold in the islands comes from the mainland, where it is imported from South Africa.
Of all places.
So I wonder what's going on there. The initial shortage early this year began when the Zanzibar Liquor Control Board delayed renewed permits for 3 established importers. Okay, so it's government, it's administration that has screwed this up.
Yep.
It's not clear why the licenses of the 3 firms, which had supplied alcohol for more than 2 decades, was not renewed. Someone didn't get their kickback. That's what you got to look up.
Yep.
Look that up.
I actually wish something like that would happen in South Africa. I feel like a lot of us are just functioning alcoholics, if I'm being honest.
If
we drink a lot.
You know that's true, because during the first few weeks of lockdown, people lost their mind. Not about a disease that was going around. And yes, it was killing a few people, but
not about their civil liberties either.
No, they didn't care about that. They didn't care about all of their rights being stripped away from them in the name of a global pandemic. They didn't care about
how we were misled.
They weren't allowed to leave their house after like 10 o'clock at night. They didn't care about that. They didn't care about only being able to buy certain things in the shop because certain areas were considered like more dangerous for garden equipment. Do you remember that nonsense? You couldn't wear certain shoes according to our government. You couldn't buy a Woolworths chicken. People didn't get upset about any of that. What they got upset about?
Alcohol.
Right.
And to a lesser degree, cigarettes too. But we're talking about alcohol. And you remember all of those concoctions people were making? Like they were making homemade pineapple
beer and
wada.
Like really terrible stuff. It was like, when people make those that vodka in Russia out of petrol and God knows what else. Right?
Like and it's at no point did we as a country take a look at our relationship with alcohol and have a genuine conversation about it, because I've heard differing stats about where we rank in the world, but somehow I've been told that we are in the top 10 of the countries that drink on the planet. So it's like, I don't know, we need to take a serious look at this. And when you think about all the vehicle fatalities that happen, or the fact that, our government does not ensure that Metro police officers do their job, so that when someone is found under the influence, they don't just give you $100 and still drive away. Like, South Africa needs to take a serious look in the mirror about this alcohol.
What I always found interesting is the number of pedestrian deaths because of drinking. So we talk about cars because it's easier to regulate cars on the road. it's easier to make rules and to enforce those rules. But there's no one enforcing rules on pedestrians crossing streets drunk in the middle of the day. And there are a lot of those in South Africa. We even have to put up huge fences between highways and urban areas and suburban areas because drunk idiots will do it in broad daylight, which is actually safer than at night when you can't see them, crossing roads.
And it's crazy. In my neighborhood in Meadowlands, like there was a time you'd actually get arrested for public drinking or even, public drunkenness.
Really?
Yeah.
There was
for
a time.
while. There was a time.
I don't think so anymore.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't happen anymore.
You've seen these videos of the police asleep in the car with like a bottle of beer in their hand.
Yeah.
Really?
There was this one video that was absolutely insane. This one police officer got into a accident with his work vehicle with some poor civilian, and someone starts recording the video. His colleagues were trying to hide him, essentially put him in the car, but he was completely hammered. And that's the country we live in. Welcome to Saudi.
Yeah, well, Slippery Pickle says Maritzburg. I don't know why, but Peter Maritzburg used to have the record for the most alcohol consumed per capita out of any city in the world.
I wonder why.
Maybe it's a mix of like what a horrible place Peter Maritzburg is.
Is it really that horrible?
No, I went to primary school in Hilton and Maritzburg, and I do have to say it's not a city that's on the up and up. I mean, it was at that stage still okay. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But Christoph says, if you've been to Maritzburg, I don't blame them. That's what I'm getting at. Thank you, Christoph. Quite right. Jack, your name is the name of a whiskey. You need to take a look in the mirror and leave us and our drinks alone, says Sanele.
Hey, Sanele, I don't care where they put my name, bro. But we need to have a sober-minded conversation.
All right. Well, I mean, you talk about alcohol. It really animates South Africans. We get very, very upset about anything to do with anyone coming in between us and our alcohol. I have to say, it's now 6 days into February and a month of January. Not a drop. Haven't missed it.
And you're doing just fine.
And I'm not going to boast like I'm some kind of, I know there are people who are very addicted to alcohol, and that's a serious thing.
Yes.
For me, it was never like that. So it's much easier for me to give it up than if I were an alcoholic. But I don't know. I mean, I've set this goal in my head that at least until the end of March, I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
And I just want to see what happens.
Yeah.
Physiologically. If I find that people are hugely boring, I might have to start again.
Okay.
If I find that it makes no real difference, because I never drank like that much.
To excess.
Anyway. Yeah. I mean, I would drink, but it was like binging, and it would be once a week, and then it was over. But what I'm enjoying is like the no hangovers, early mornings and weekends.
Yeah.
Not being so tired because I sleep better. But we'll see how it goes.
Interestingly enough, a couple of years ago, I got into psychedelics for the first time, and my relationship with alcohol has waned ever since. Like, and mind you,
that's interesting. But do you think you've just replaced one thing with another?
No, not even replaced. It's just
what psychedelic? Are we talking mushrooms?
Mushrooms, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. A lot of people are doing those. Supposedly illegal, but I don't think anyone cares.
Yeah, I don't care either. I did them at Opi Kopi when that was still a thing a couple of years ago.
Wow,
and
you started early.
Yeah, and you know what I discovered was there are a lot more interesting stimuli out there in the world that you could possibly use. And on top of that, alcohol doesn't really go well with my stomach. Like something happens every time I drink. The following morning, like I get hungover in my stomach, which is not something great to experience.
Sounds horrible.
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So if I have a choice between drinking or perhaps rolling up a joint, I'd most likely roll up a joint.
Yeah, Nico says, I saw you on with a tequila on Instagram the other day with Alan Ford. You can actually check with Alan and with Leanne Manis and her husband, because we were in that picture together. I posed for they gave me one, posed for the picture with it, and then I gave it to someone else. So you don't have to worry. I'm not cheating. And even if I was, it's not like some hard and fast rule. I'm not someone who's trying to avoid going into bad habits again. I want to see what happens. Even if I had that tequila, which I didn't, it would have made no difference because it would have been one in a space of like a month, which I want to make 3 months, as opposed to 10 over a weekend.
What I can tell you is your first drink after 3 months is going to spin your world around real
You think
quickly.
so? It's going to hit me hard.
Yeah, it is going to hit you hard. Definitely. Yep.
So Vincent says, I like alcohol. I'm a weekend alcoholic. I don't see the being hungover during. I get high during the week. You got a lot of substances you're relying on.
Yeah.
But again,
You're chopping and changing.
I don't care. Matthew's taking the piss out of you saying we have a druggie on the show.
Kiss my well-rounded black behind.
That's a good response to anything.
Seriously.
That's a good response.
Come on.
For some reason, I prefer to drink during the week, says Lito. You don't find annoying people in bars and restaurants during the week. It's only people that can afford it, not people that spin for a living.
Oh,
okay.
Interesting.
All right.
Very interesting.
But then are you drinking on your own? That's the problem I have. It's like, Lito, if you're drinking on your own.
Yeah, that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
And like, how do you make it work during the week after drinking? Like,
maybe he doesn't have a job.
Maybe. Maybe
he has a job, but he's the only one who knows that he does that job.
Or he works from home,
I don't know.
It's a possibility.
It's all, listen, again, you bring up alcohol, it makes some people
it hits a nerve.
Suddenly wake up.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk to them about anything else. You'd say, well, are you voting in the election this year? No, I don't care about that. Politics doesn't really affect me.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, what do you think if they banned alcohol? No. God, you want to motivate people to go to the polls? Just tell them that this party stands for alcohol, that one doesn't.
Yep. Grab your Cokie and a blackboard so we can draw placards and doi.
It's amazing what motivates people.
It is. It actually kind of points out, what people find important and what people don't. And I think, look, you're free to do whatever the hell you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone, as long as it's not to anyone's detriment. I've got no problem with that. Go ahead, do it. But don't be sensitive when we bring up the conversation. Like, can we just have a chat about it? It's not that serious.
People are not addicted to good things. They're addicted to horrible things. Although I have noticed that the gyms are quite full at the moment.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
That's true.
So I went last night. I had such a busy day yesterday. I eventually got there at 7:00 last night. And it was busy. There was so much going on. I couldn't do half the things I wanted to do because the equipment was being used. There are lots of people. And I thought, good, this is good.
It is.
Normally, I'd be pissed off and irritated because I couldn't get what I need. But I looked around and I thought, these people are motivated. I am pleased with, I will smile at every one of them. I will be polite. I am thrilled that there are so many South Africans who are looking to get into shape.
Yeah,
even if it only lasts another month, at least they're trying.
Yeah. And it's forcing the rest of us to get our shit together too.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you see how busy it is and you are not among those people,
ooh,
and take my and Jack's word for it here. There are a lot of people who have suddenly decided February's our month.
Yeah.
Because it's now the 6th of Feb. So somewhere between, coming out of that hangover in early January, they've decided this is the month. It's February, from here on, we're going to set new standards.
There you
go.
Stick
to it if you can.
Love it. Love it for you.
Jade says alcohol is destructive in every way. Smoke a joint rather.
Jade, welcome to the family. Thank you. Welcome. Well, let's leave the destructive part out of it. Every now and again, a drink is cool, man.
I have, you know what? I really don't mind. You do whatever you want.
Yeah.
If you want to do hard drugs, you go ahead and do it. If you're hurting other people and you're hurting yourself, you should really stop.
That's it.
But I don't know that because I'm not in your life and I'm not the police. And I don't ever want to tell anyone else what to do. I don't want to tell anyone what to eat. I don't want to tell anyone what to drink. I don't want to tell anyone what drugs to do or what to ingest that may be harmful to them. It's none of my business. I am totally disinterested in that stuff. Telling people what to do, it's so stupid.
That's what I'm saying. Like my only thing is just don't bring any harm to any other people. Like if your goal is to harm yourself, by all means do it. I'm just saying don't bring other people into your nonsense. That's it.
I use Alcogram, says Sneak, to track my annual booze habits. It's quite useful and insightful. I
Alcogram.
don't know what Alcogram is, but it's amazing how many people are using these Fitbits, and we even spoke about it with Alison Bentley, the sleep doctor, yesterday, because people are monitoring everything about themselves, and I think that's probably good. On average, it's probably good, but I do think there's also a huge amount of time spent analyzing and analyzing and analyzing until the point where you're paralyzed.
Yeah.
And so many people are wrapped up in themselves already. They're self-absorbed. Now they have statistics about
actually
themselves
prove them,
to be even more self-absorbed about. I don't know what Alcogram is, but it sounds like it could be interesting.
Yeah.
Just pay attention to that.
Yep.
All right. Here's a last thing that I want to get to, because this is a news story this morning. An independent body that reviews how the owner of Facebook moderates online content has said that the firm should label fake posts rather than remove them. The oversight board at Meta said they should not remove a fake video of President Joe Biden because it did not violate the manipulated media policy. It said the policy was incoherent and should be widened beyond its scope. Ahead of a busy election year, the oversight board called for more labeling of fake material on Facebook. So this would be, what AI and deep fakes can do, where they could take footage and sound and they can make it look like, Joe Biden is saying, I'm going to press the nuclear button on Russia. And he would never say that. Who knows with Joe Biden?
Yeah, you never know.
But he would never say that. You would think, you would hope. But then they make this fake video. Can you imagine the damage that might do if some not particularly intelligent people in the bureaucracy in Moscow sees the video, because their job is to monitor TikTok or whatever. They see this and they think, oh my God, Joe Biden going to blow us up. And then suddenly you have World War III breaking out. Someone has to be able to moderate and to be able to show us the difference between the fake stuff and the real stuff.
Yeah.
And Meta says, we must just label the fake material.
I don't know if they're willing to do, or at least they're capable of doing a good job at that. I think the pandemic was an eye opener, particularly with these social media platforms, about what was allowed to be said and what information was, was disseminated on these things. And I'm not sure if we can actually trust them to stop these fake posts coming out.
We definitely can't trust them, because these are the same people who just completely obliterated some people's opinions because they didn't fit the narrative that they were instructed to carry. So I'm a little bit nervous to trust anyone at Meta. I think rather let stupid people do stupid things. Let them make stupid decisions. Let them not check their sources. And we'll just have to deal with the consequences, even if it does lead to World War III. Well, stupid people can do what stupid people do.
Yeah, we seem kind of distant to get there in one way or another. Might as well get it over and done with.
There's a little dystopian nonsense for you this morning. But at least it came from people who have your best interest.
Well, all of these rich people in the US are building bunkers. Perhaps we should invest in that too. Who knows?
Do you know where a lot of them are building their bunkers?
No.
New Zealand.
Why New
Zealand?
So
far from everything.
Yeah.
That if nuclear war did break out, this is the reanening anyway. I don't know if it's if this is the whole reason. But one of the reasons is because New Zealand is so far from everything.
Yeah.
And no one's thinking of nuking New Zealand. Yeah. They're not enemies with anyone.
Yeah,
really.
Sure.
There's no country that's like, oh, those New Zealanders.
Yeah. I haven't heard that.
Kim Jong-un sitting there going, if I get the chance to blow anyone up, it'll be New Zealand.
No one's saying that.
That's the place. Plus, it's got a fair amount of space, especially on South Island. You've got mountains, you've got the sea around you. It's isolated. That would be the place to do it. So a lot of these tech billionaires are building these bunkers.
Well, when shit hits the fan, good luck.
Where would you rather be?
I'd definitely be in South Africa. I'm not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere.
But let's face it, Jack. It's also because we can't go anywhere.
No. Even if I could, look. Fine, I'll take that. Right.
Yeah.
Even if I could,
I'm with you.
I wouldn't go anywhere.
I'm with you.
Like,
don't worry.
What are you
You
going
don't
to
have
do?
to explain it to me. I'm with you.
What are you going
also, I'm stuck here till the end.
Come on.
However that end looks.
We've got in Joburg, we've got a couple of skyscrapers that you could probably take out. But after that, I'm running around Soweto with my people. We'll be fine. We'll figure it out.
I think if you remember that movie 2012 with the world is flooded and there's this huge shit that goes down and everybody dies and they build these huge monster boats. And where do they eventually end up? South Africa.
There you go.
Is where they anchor at the end of the world apocalypse.
Yep.
No, I mean, it's not science, but it was a fun movie and it did make me feel good about us.
There you go. I like our chances too.
Mary says this is such a great thing to end the first hour on, because we're going to be talking about Democracy 101 next. And we're going to be joined by Ray Hartley and Greg Mills, who are the authors of this book, which is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it's 3 scenarios of South Africa's uncertain future, which obviously unfolds in the course of the elections. But Mary says, morning, I would like to thank this very show, she says, for helping me to check if I'm still registered to vote. I got the SMS number here and I used it. It saved me the trouble of going to the stations. Thank you. So, wow.
Awesome.
That's great to hear, Mary.
Fantastic.
We need everybody who listens to this show and everybody who has not registered to vote to get in there and do it.
Definitely.
Very excited.
Yep.
And I would love to have as many people go and take part in the democratic process as possible, because the very worst possible outcome for this country is that people lose faith in the idea of representative democracy.
Yep.
Not, if party X or party Y win, there are obviously good, bad, and ugly scenarios, which we'll talk about in the next hour. But if you give up on democracy, what are you going to replace that with?
Yeah, because every other option is
do you want president for life Malema? Do you want what kind of a system are you thinking of? What would be better than this?
I can't think of
and
one.
Then one last thing from Mapelo says, PSA, since you were talking about card taping yesterday, if your phone is unlocked, anyone can use your Google Wallet. No fingerprint or Face ID required, and there is no in-app setting to lock it. So you have to be very, very sharp.
Keep a lookout for that
front. Yeah. So keep your eyes open and also don't leave your phone open. I think that's the idea. All right. When we come back, we'll speak to Greg Mills and to Ray Hartley about their new book. Don't go anywhere. CliffCentral.com. It is a Tuesday morning. Democracy 101 is next. Don't go anywhere.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
A BMW M3, for example.
Yeah.
Now, it was attainable to a lot of people, let's say in 2003, when the E46 came around. That's the one with the dolphin shape, as people like to call it. Now, fast forward, let's say 20 years up to now, in that those vehicles are fetching such a high price now.
Yeah.
Now, some people will equate it to classic car tax and that, and just nostalgia tax, because nowadays, with the shift of the automotive industry, a lot of people are going back to those older cars and reliving the older days of, when I used to have hair, it used to be like this. The price.
Yeah. So
I apologize.
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
All right, it is Tuesday morning. We are well into February, and we are only a few months away from our elections. It's one of the things that we are most, I think, interested in South Africa is what could happen as a result of the way the elections go. Lots of people suddenly very animated about what our future may deliver, and it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the books that's been written about this is something that I thought it would be worth paying attention to today, not only because the three men actually who wrote the book, Ray Hartley, Greg Mills, and Mills Soko, have done so much excellent work around this, but also because we need to take in as much information as we can ahead of whenever this happens, May, hopefully June, whenever the president eventually decides to get off his backside and announce the election. Because even the IEC is sitting there going, come on, dude, we need a date. And I don't know why he's delaying, but anyway, anyone can speculate what that might be all about. But Greg and Ray are on the show with us this morning. It's a great pleasure to have Ray Hartley in the studio. Ray, it's been such a long time since I last saw you. It's nice to have you here. Yeah, very, very good. Yeah. And I hope that Greg's on the line. Let's just check. Greg, hi, Greg. How are you?
Good morning to you.
Good stuff. All right, so congrats on the book, guys. There's plenty of material at the moment for us to pay attention to. The politicians are putting their feet in their mouths at regular rates and in regular ways. I also see that there are lots and lots of surveys being done. There people doing research all over the place, asking small and large groups of people what they think, what they're going to do. Everyone is trying to predict behavior. But what I appreciate about your book is that you've really just given us 3 potential outcomes here. And people like these things simplified because, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever it is, humans just like a simple solution to complex situations. And they want to understand things in a binary fashion. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Luckily, you added the ugly scenario as well, just to frighten the hell out of us. So tell me how the book came about and also why you guys decided to put it in this sense, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, well, I could have a first crack at that. I'm sure that Ray will talk more about the scenarios, but I saw a great article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, which summarized for me many of the sentiments behind why we wrote this book. It was an article about Trump and his effect on democracy in the United States, and it said, and in terms of the sometimes visceral reaction that people have towards Trump, and it said that you shouldn't sort of dismiss Trump or see him as a threat to democracy. He's the embodiment of democracy. The fact that you have this choice, that it allows for people like Trump to have their moment, is actually what democracy is all about. And part of that is about this power of choice. And you spoke about that earlier, Gareth, in terms of actually empowering individuals to make that choice. And one of the trends in our democracy, particularly over the last 20 years, has been the declining voter participation. More than 1/3 of South Africans now don't vote, they choose not to vote. And what this book was about was to strengthen the cause of choice, to strengthen participation in our democratic system. And what it really does is to try and inform voters about the choice, to make them participants in our political process. Because until now, there's another trend in South Africa, which is people work their way around the government. Rather than deal with the realities of our politics, they rail against them, and they essentially opt out. They either move to where there's better governance and jobs. So that's why you see so much semigration in the country for those who can and those who can afford it and those who can find work. But people also make themselves ANC proof or government proof. So they try and privatize their services wherever possible. And what this is about sort of reinstating that democratic choice as in terms of what voters have within their own power. And as I say, making them not spectators in a wider theater that somebody else is running, but actually putting them at the center, making them central characters. And that's what we've essentially tried to do in this book, is to go back to those fantastic scenarios produced by people like Clem Sunter and others in the late 1980s, which helped to give South Africans a sense of direction as to where they might go, how their choice might make a difference. So this is a process fundamentally about empowerment.
I think one of the problems that we also have in this country, and gentlemen, feel free to tell me I'm losing my mind here, but is that we've lost the imagination to envisage a country which could work. We've almost been browbeaten and shown how awful everything is, to the extent that we've now stopped believing in all of the possible good scenarios. So I'm glad that that's right up front, and perhaps we could start with that one, and we will slowly, over the course of this hour, disabuse people of all the good and positive notions, and we'll give them the worst possible outcome. But let's start with the good stuff, because Jack's been spending the last week going around to shopping malls, taxi ranks, places where young people congregate, to address exactly what it is and to ask these young people what Greg just spoke about, the lack of participation here. I mean, what Greg was saying is true, right?
Very true. And what is surprising to me, particularly when we hit the road, was the fact that it's not that people are completely disengaged. A lot of us are not completely educated as to where to take our thoughts, ideas, suggestions, all of that stuff. So it's not that people have this they don't want to be involved in politics or in the running of our day-to-day lives. They actually want to bring about that change. But a lot of people just don't know where to start. So if I could ask, what would be some of the good things, as Gareth mentioned?
Yeah, what's the best case scenario according to your book? And I do encourage people to buy the book, by the way. We're not going to make this easy for you, but I do think if Greg and Ray can just give us some ideas of what the good might be, then it'll give us a starting point, as Jack puts it.
Yeah, well, let me pick that one up. I think the good is unfolding, but not seen. And that is the gathering of a political center in the country, which has started to happen. So, I mean, to understand South Africa, you've got to get the fact that since 1948, we've been ruled by two parties.
It's ridiculous.
Two dominant parties that have owned the elections and have been able to do whatever they want. The National Party and the ANC. So there is quite a deep psychological thing that results from that there is no South African experience of competitive democracy. Okay, there's nothing to look back on and say, well, when we changed governments, back in 99, that's what happened, and now we're going to make an informed choice because we can see the advantages or disadvantages of doing that. So there is no template for where we are now, where the ANC is falling below 50%. And for the first time, the country is going to have to let go of the idea of Big Daddy and actually stand up and be an adult kind of country where there's real competition. So a lot of people are unable to see their way out of that. They cling to the idea of having a dominant state despite all of its faults and failings. And so you have this very peculiar situation where we do a survey which shows that if you ask people what's the best governed province, they say the Western Cape, okay, including people from other provinces. And if you say which party governs South Africa best, 30% say the DA and 30% say the ANC. So if you look at the spread based on election outcomes, a lot of ANC people are saying the DA governs best. But people are clinging on to, they can't let go of this relationship that they have with this dominant party.
But the temptation then is to say, well, these people are stupid, and maybe we shouldn't have a universal franchise, because if people can't even, if they'll say and understand how good government could work, the good case scenario, but they're voting against their own best interests. I mean, you see this even in America. You know, you've got Republicans who vote sometimes against their own interests, and Democrats who do the same. And these are supposedly smart people in the first world, in the world's last remaining superpower. So it's not just here in South Africa, but dumb and democracy do sometimes go together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've got to also see that there is, however, a transition underway. So I think that the expectation that there would be some kind of lightning shift. You know,
because everything we want these days to
but if you
happen
look,
immediately,
yeah.
right?
you know, if you go back 10, 15 years, you know, the Western Cape was under ANC control.
That's right.
If you look at this election, we're expecting maybe Gauteng, Western Cape, maybe KwaZulu-Natal. Some people are saying Free State. All of these places could fall under competitive coalition or other party governments. So that's a sign that there's a shift happening. It's just not happening at the pace which people would like to see. You know, it's a very undramatic thing. It happens over a successive number of elections. So, you know, the fact that the capital city of South Africa, both the capital cities of South Africa, are actually run by opposition.
It's a healthy sign.
So we're on the road to something positive, and the question is, how far will we go in this election?
All right, but Greg, I also get the idea from Ray's tone on this that your good scenario isn't like rainbows and unicorns. The good scenario is let's let's have the most positive possible outcome here. Let's try to predict a future where, you know, the stars align and things go well. But it's certainly not going to solve all of our problems. What do you think the main touch points of such a positive outcome might be for the average citizen? What would make it worth people going to the polls and voting for this good scenario?
Yeah, I'll come back to that in a second, if I may, Gareth. I just want to touch on something that Jack said earlier, and Ray has also briefly mentioned, and that is about whether change is possible and how long change takes. And one of the great pleasures in my job is being able to travel and being able to meet people who were at the center of momentous political change. And I recently spent time in Lithuania and met a 90-year-old gentleman, Professor Landsbergis, who was the man who essentially, without putting too much drama around it, was the man who brought down the Soviet Union, because he refused Gorbachev's overtures in the early 1990s to stay within the Union and took Lithuania out of it. And in so doing, basically sort of undid the whole shaky edifice. And he's a wonderfully quiet, thoughtful, chess-playing, piano-playing academic. Shows that academics are useful for something. And he's a man who, most unlikely, was a man of some resolve, but who made the right sets of decisions. And I think it's just a lesson, again, that we're not sort of bit players in somebody else's wider drama. We are actually at the center. And politicians like to make us believe that they're the ones who are going to save us, rescue us, deliver us from evil. But it's actually ourselves that have to do that. The most unlikely people are going to have to step up to the plate. And there's a very sad axiom in our line of work, which is that the period of recovery is at least as long as the period of decline. So one of the features I think we've had of government in South Africa is it takes a very long time to get things right. Building countries is about assiduous investment over very long periods of time, which gradually sort of compounds into a remarkable story. But you've got to start somewhere, and it takes a long time if you've been in the process of descent to get yourself out of that. And South Africa, unfortunately, has got itself in a fairly long-term dive we're busy nosing over, perhaps even further, given the sort of radicalization of our politics, at least in the foreign domain. But it's going to take a long while to get it out of. But there are these stories of, and they're throughout this book, of how individuals made a difference, whether they be sort of small people or big people, they nonetheless made a difference. And that it's that process again of empowerment which is crucial. But to your exact question on the good, well, the good is where you have more effective government and a stronger economy. If you're looking at this in the sort of matrix terms, the good is where you have a multi-party coalition that functions. This could be a coalition of the center, that you have the ANC aligning with centrist parties. Our surveys, and we've done two, we're about to do a third survey countrywide, and these are very carefully, weighted and representative surveys, show that nearly 80% of South Africans favor a coalition outcome. And I think that is because the alternative, again, is worse, and also because people can't perhaps bring themselves entirely to break away from the ANC for the reasons that Ray has suggested. But the good scenarios where reforms are fundamentally identified and implemented. I think we're not only world champions at rugby and in the UFC, in the middleweight division, Drickus, but we're also world champions at laying out plans and never getting them done. We have this succession of wonderful acronyms which look fantastic, and the presidents of various presidents roll them out on a routine basis, but we never get them done. So sort of matching execution capability and political will with the ideas is crucial in the good scenario. And of course, that then drives the retention of skills, private investment. You have what we've had all along, which is sound fiscal policy and monetary management. That continues. And then we tweak systems around economic empowerment. We have a BEE that delivers not to the rich, but to the poor, that we have a merit-based public service, and that our cities become poles of growth rather than these sunken morasses, which we are all too familiar with now. And then we focus our foreign policy finally on our region. We spend a lot of time talking about what we're going to do in the foreign domain, but the critical element that should be driving our foreign policy, at least in the regional sense, is expediting the flow of goods and services and people. When we talk about expediting the flow of goods and services and people, we talk about trade summits and tariffs. We don't actually talk about the border posts, which are the single biggest impediment, and all the officialdom that goes with that. So those are the type of things in that good scenario, but it's founded fundamentally on a different political outcome, and that's a political outcome which is coalition-based around the center.
And I think before we get to the bad and the ugly, I think it's worth pausing and reflecting, because we have tried some things in this country which have poisoned the well. And I think it's also worth reflecting on the things in South Africa that have not worked, and the ideologies that have contributed to us becoming a poor country and contributed to the unemployment that we're facing and to the enormous social welfare system that has grown out under us, which is unsustainable. Everybody except the president seems to know and understand that. But there's an ideology at the heart of the ANC which has been rotten and which has been supported by far too many sensible people for far too long. Do you think it's worth at least South Africa stopping, taking note of that, and not making the same mistake again? Ray, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a record of, as Greg has said, these great policies, and then they're never implemented. And the question is why?
And also terrible policies that were implemented.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some bad policies as well.
They're trying with the NHI now.
Yeah.
Expropriation without compensation, just generally having no idea how to run the economy since Trevor Manuel, Tito Mboweni, and Thabo Mbeki were running things.
Yeah. No, I think it's one of the advantages of an incompetent ANC is that they haven't been able to pull off that expropriation without compensation.
Thank God.
I mean, I think the poor policy, implementation. And the question is why? And I have a rule of thumb, which is the rule of rent. If there's no rent in it for the ruling party and its elite, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that sort of underlies the unwillingness to allow private partnerships into government. Because if you bring in private energy generation, they're going to be efficient. They're going to be competitive. They're going to have margins to meet. They're listed companies.
Mm-hmm.
They will report on their financials. So suddenly you're in a scenario where you're going to be a spectator watching someone do something rather than rolling up your sleeves and getting into the coffers, to put it bluntly, of that institution. So when, so therefore the private sector gets kept out of development and growth. It should be, the rail thing should have been long solved. There are many models across the world where you have private concessions of rail, private port concessions that work, and these logistical things happen. That doesn't mean ceding sovereignty, as is sometimes given as the excuse. It means mobilizing the capital to make these big infrastructure things work. And the same is true of power generation. So the unwillingness to do that derives from the ANC being an entirely rent-based kind of distribute.
And they've still got a love affair with socialism, for God's sake.
Which is strange, right?
Yeah, I think it's there as window dressing.
I think they're true believers. I mean, there are, the National Democratic Revolution, which they never stop talking about when they gather in NEC meetings and things. That's always at the center of the agenda. And we're not taking them seriously. Some of them mean it.
Yeah, but I don't entirely buy that, because they're all in business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're all in various businesses.
Business of rent seeking, as you put it.
And when they're in those businesses, they want those businesses to be profitable as possible to distribute, the gains. So to my mind, it's a kind of like ideological window dressing to pretend really to the mass of the people that they actually are busy with this socialist project.
A little earlier on, you guys mentioned that you do these surveys, and the entire time I've been wondering to myself, like, a democratic republic is made up of people that are essentially of the people, by the people, for the people, right? And as South Africans, we kind of seem somehow disconnected between ourselves and the ruling class, or the governing class, excuse me. It seems as if there's some sort of disconnect with how we think of ourselves and the ruling elites, if we can call it that way. Are we somehow separated? Have we separated the fact that these people actually come from us as everyday human beings? They've
separated themselves out because they don't know about the price of bread and traffic and security concerns. We're paying for all of that for them, and they live these lives of distance from the rest of us. I think that's a good point. I mean, maybe that's also why there's such an apathy among ordinary people, because they see these guys living in the ivory towers and they think, well, we don't.
They live completely different lives from us.
Greg,
I think that Jack, you've put your finger on something. In a part, and I love the image of the sort of socialist NEC arriving in a fleet of Trabants, wearing East German woolen wear with the latest cut and fashion. I just don't see Fikile and Balula looking quite like that, or exchanging his official wheels for that. So I think it's Gucci socialism. It's playing to the crowds in a particular way, trying to prove the ANC's radical credentials at the same time that they are essentially making money for themselves in a fairly obscene way in many instances, and with their cohorts. But why is it, and it's a curious question, We all know that things happen for reasons. We also know that things don't happen for reasons. So when and people are not fools. So why is it that people continue to vote in a particular way? Why is it that people sort of ignore the evidence of, let's say, the relatively well-run, as Ray has pointed out, Western Cape, for instance, and still vote for the ANC? And it happens in the Western Cape, where I am sitting currently. Some of the areas where the most money has been spent on service delivery, the most money has been spent on security, in Nyanga and Guguletu, for example, there are still vast majority of people vote for the ANC. So the answer to this is, I think, fundamentally in our history. Of course, identity politics runs very deep in South Africa, and of course politicians like to rake that all the time, and people are unfortunately play that game. I think it's to do, in a related sense, with trust and the absence of trust. And so when the ANC stands up and says the DA is going to bring back apartheid and it's going to take away social grants, none of which is true, there's a fear that this is going to happen, even though the ANC hasn't been able to deliver what people anticipated. There's also, of course, a sort of degree of celebrationism. People like to think back to 1994. Of course, that's becoming an increasingly distant memory. It's only people of our age cohort and older who kind of remember that moment. It's celebrated, but it's now a distant memory for most people. It's more than a generation ago. So why is it that people don't join the dots? Why is it that people are not willing to break out? And I think some of that answer, and I'll be curious to see what Ray has to say about this and yourselves, is because opposition parties don't present themselves in a way that makes it easy to do so. So, it's also about, it's not just about convincing the voter on the facts, it's also about convincing the voter in a way that makes it easy for you to put your cross there. That you feel that you're not only safe and you know what the record is, but that there's this element of trust. And how does an opposition party go about establishing an element of trust after such a vicious, horrid history that South Africa has had? And I think that's the central question for oppositions. It's not just all about the ANC. It's also about what opposition parties do.
And, just to echo your sentiments, I think that is something that I've picked up on, especially in like the recent 2 weeks or so, having spoken to a lot of people on the ground. It's the fact that we all can agree that we need better governance. Unfortunately, the opposition parties have not done a good job at all of letting us know concisely what it is they want to do.
What does a good job look like? Because unless they've been in government, they can't prove anything through their actions. I mean, the EFF's a perfect example. They don't actually run a single ward in the country, right? So you can't really judge them on their merits. All you can do is judge them on their rhetoric. And in that case, I mean, I give Julius 10 out of 10 for his rhetoric. I happen to disagree with most of it, but he's doing a good job of selling his message.
Sure,
what would you like to see them do? How do they prove this?
Like, for argument's sake, the person that pops to mind right now is an overseas individual, but Vivek Ramaswamy, for argument's sake. He's got a track record in business. He can show up and say, I know how to put together an idea, put people together, work towards one goal, and actually make it happen.
But we also had Cyril, who told us he was in business.
No, but we've seen
how well he done.
We've seen his track record in business. It's not that great. All I'm saying is, if, for argument's sake, John Steenhuisen, I'm not too sure about his political victories and all of that stuff, but if he could communicate to the country just how well he has done in his position, perhaps we change our minds.
This is us being... Ray and Greg have both spoken at length this morning about how well the Western Cape is being run. That's all I need. I don't need a whole lot more. If the Freedom Front or the EFF or the Mkhonto weSizwe Party run a place well, that's all I want to see.
Sure.
I'm not looking for a whole lot more. Well, who are these people who constantly need to be coddled and looked after and sold messages and given T-shirts and told that everything's going to be sunny and fantastic if you vote for them? What do South Africans want? It's childish, for God's sake. I mean, Ray, do you want to add to what Greg had to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that what maybe the opposition could do better is to present a simple, coherent vision of how they will take us out of this mess.
This multi-party charter
at a national.
Did they try to do that?
They are doing that. I mean, they're, but the message hasn't been very loud and clear, and maybe that's going to start picking up as we get towards the election. But somebody who would, that you would say, right, now I can see how we get from where we are to where we want to be.
Mm.
And it's not all, to focus on bashing the ANC and the ANC has failed and is corrupt and so on really is, I don't think there's anybody, not even in the ANC, who doesn't agree. Okay. So that's kind of a wasted energy, wasted bandwidth. Rather get on to, when we get into office, this is how we're going to do things. What's going to happen on day one? Is there a cohort of directors general with technocratic merit that are ready and waiting to move into these government departments and shake things up? Somebody tell me that.
So
show me those people.
So we had we had Gate McKenzie on last Thursday, and he said in a completely clear and qualified way that he would not even bother with political appointments if he could find people who were better in a specific portfolio and who had the technical and merit background to be able to run things better. He said, Ministry of tourism, he'd find someone who was the best at that. If it was the Ministry of medicine, he'd find someone who was the best at that. Which is interesting and refreshing, but that's not the kind of stuff that we hear from the three big parties, because we know that they'd all put politicians in the positions.
Yeah. I think there are political appointments, and there always will be, for example, in the cabinet. What's more critical to me is the technocrats who's the director general.
The directors general.
So who's running Kusile Power Station? I don't happen to know. Maybe a very good person who's undermined by bad circumstances or whatever, but you can't really make a compromise there.
Yeah.
There you have to have someone who understands engineering, who understands science, and who can run a large, complex organization. Okay, that narrows it down. There are not a lot of people like that out there. That person has to run that power station. Then they have to be backed up and allowed to make the appointments necessary to make that power station work. And that includes, we need coal that's of a certain standard, and this contract has to go.
But all of this is riddled with catered deployment crooks who are so deep in the corruption that to weed them out is going to take not only a huge amount of political will, but some aggression and some force. And I wonder who among our opposition, to agree with all of you on this point, who among them has the spine to take these guys on, right? We don't see a lot of that. We've got to have some politics with bite again instead of just bark.
Because I think that's the opportunity that they're missing at this point in time. We've got 30 years of the ANC being the governing party. There's evidence all over us. We can point to so many different things that have fallen apart, but there's not, in my point of view, there isn't enough of problem-solving communication coming from political parties. As Ray suggests, like, this is the person we're going to put in at the head of ESCOM, and this is the reason why. Because this person's is an engineer and knows exactly what they're doing. This is the person we're going to put as Minister of Education. They've got 20 years in the education field. They understand what works and what doesn't. No one is saying that. Instead, we're all pointing our fingers in the same direction, saying that's bad. I think we all know that.
I agree. I just want to have one last thing to say about this, and that is that we've seen what performative politics does all over the world. We've seen a whole lot of people rise to leadership positions who are really performing the role of a leader instead of being a leader. And I would prefer to see actions rather than words at this point. So I don't care about the messaging and the communications and what suit they're wearing, what color their tie is, any of that 90s and 2000s Tony Blair nonsense. I think people want to see activity. They want to see people who can make things happen. They want to see drive and determination and, more importantly, results. Yeah. Which brings us back to the book. What is the bad scenario, gentlemen? What Ray, you can start us off here. What's the bad, and save some space for the ugly, people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bad scenario is very clear and very alarming. That is, the ANC drops below 50%, enters into a coalition with the EFF. The EFF drives a hard bargain, as they've already indicated they will, and they take some. They're insisting, for example, on a senior position in finance and the deputy presidency. Once the way that the EFF operates, it would be a reverse takeover of the ANC, because Malema will simply outcompete them politically from within, dominate the messaging from government, cause a lot of alarm and despondency, to use the old. I think it's illegal in Zimbabwe to cause alarm and despondency, and that covers quite a lot of things. And then you would have the classic scenario, the Venezuela scenario, the Zimbabwe scenario. I mean, the EFF openly admires Venezuela. Yeah. So we have a flight of capital, a collapsing currency, inflation through the roof, jobs already we're at a catastrophic level, just disappearing, and industrial base and the mining sector collapsing.
But they'll nationalize the mines and the banks, and then we'll all have money.
Yeah.
That's the message they're selling people. Julius was out this weekend, I'm sure you all saw, saying to people, look, don't worry about this 350 Rand grant the ANC says we'll take away as the EFF. We'll keep the 350. Plus, if you have a matric, we'll give you 2,000. And you have a university degree, we'll give you 6,000. Forget the fact that Julius is inversely turning the pyramid here on poor people, the ones who don't have degrees and don't have matric, probably the ones who need the help the most. But according to him, no, we'll reward you as you climb up the education ladder, hoping that that's enough to keep you at bay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fantasy. I mean, it's just kind of
made up. Yeah.
Bizarre, really, that anyone would take that seriously, because the state gets its money from somewhere. Taxes are going to diminish under this regime at quite a rapid rate. They're going to have to borrow. The lenders are going to be skeptical. The rate at which we're going to borrow is going to go through the roof. It's just, so you might get your 2,000 Rand, but it might be worth $1 because of the collapsing economy. So it's a pretty grim picture. There are people in the ANC who I think believe that they can manage a scenario with the EFF. Paul Mashatile,
you're right.
Others.
You're right.
But
they'll be managed right out of it. Julius is wilier than they are.
I think so. I mean, and they'll either have to split up the government shortly after it starts, or else just go along with that momentum. And both of those scenarios are pretty bad.
Greg, do you want to add anything to the bad scenario before we go to the ugly?
Yeah, I think I would just caution, again, from years of bitter experience of spending most of it in conflict-ridden societies, is that once you get into that scenario, it's very hard to get out. And the damage happens very quickly, and government sort of starts devouring itself, whether this be Venezuela or indeed in Zimbabwe. And I think the other feature of this is that it's remarkable how much meat there is to be found on the bone. And you can gnaw away for a very long time and still remain in power, even though the vast majority of your people are in poverty, destitute, as in the case of Zimbabwe. They may have indeed left, as in Zimbabwe and in Venezuela, but you still hang in there because you control the one or two critical levers of Forex, and you control a sufficiently large chunk of the economy and thus public service that keeps you there, and particularly the security services, which is really the lesson from from both those examples. So it's not a quick in and out. If we tip over into that scenario, you're going to see a significant exodus of capital and of interest in South Africa. And we will be in for a very long, I think, unfortunately, and quite terrifying ride. Can I just go back to something else that you mentioned earlier, which is, what should politicians be saying and doing that people are interested in? And I think that we overcomplicate this. I think our surveys, at least, and we can only do this as best as we can in this regard, show that people are really interested in four things. They're interested primarily in unemployment. That's the majority concern. They're secondly concerned about corruption and the impunity that goes with it. They're thirdly concerned about load shedding. Of course, that's slightly variable because the government can always play around with that and, turn the diesel generators on just before the election and make it seem as if it would have disappeared, at least temporarily, at great cost. And fourthly, they're concerned about crime. So any opposition party has to focus on those, I believe, those three areas because they have the greatest resonance. And there's always a danger here of parties confusing sort of their own beliefs with what people want. So in terms of trying to improve governance, for instance, we get involved in discussions about cadre deployment and how to instill a meritocratic-based civil service and all of that, which is fine, but it's not actually what people really want to hear. What people want to hear is where the job's going to come from, how are we going to deal with corruption and impunity and the legacy of state capture and the rent seeking that Ray has referred to that continues today, and how are we going to be safe? How are our kids going to be safe? And to do all of that, you need, of course, have governance. And actually, the government puts out the best indicator of governance countrywide, perhaps unwittingly, in its audited statements of each of the municipalities, and that 40-odd municipalities of nearly 260 get clean audits is an indicator of the state of governance. So we know exactly what to do. We just don't hold politicians to this. And the politicians, of course, are ducking and diving and avoiding this and promising all sorts of things. And again, I come back to the point, it's up to the electorates to do this. The politicians are not going to hold themselves to account. The electorate has to hold them to account.
Thank you for bringing this in, Ray. Ray brought your other book in, which is worth mentioning, Rich State, Poor State, Why Some Countries Succeed and Others Fail. And perhaps at some stage in the next couple of weeks, we can also talk to you about this book, Greg, because I think it would be interesting to compare ourselves with states that have done well in the world and states that have done poorly, because there are a plethora of choices on both of those fronts. So I think it would be interesting to delve into some of those. But Ray, let's look at the ugly scenario, and then we can talk a little more generally. But what's ugly? I mean, bad sounds horrible enough.
Ugly. Okay, we're living in ugly right now. So ugly, I think in this next election, the ANC comes in slightly over 50% and carries on. And essentially, it's a slower decline than the bad scenario.
Okay.
But ultimately, over a slightly longer period, you end up in the same place.
Right.
So it's just the deterioration of governance, the delivery failing, less water, less electricity, fewer jobs, because the ANC has shown itself unable to turn these things around, and it's very hard to imagine that they will suddenly find a way after this year's election to do what they haven't done for 30 years. So the ugly scenario is, it's almost the sort of, it's the frog boiling in the pot scenario. The water's already getting quite hot. Nobody's noticed how hot.
Well, a lot of the frogs have jumped out.
Yeah. There's quite a few frogs sitting in there, though.
Middle class black and white people are trying to find ways to get their children to go overseas, which is usually a sign that water's getting more.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think that's just the malaise that we're in.
Okay.
and that carrying on, it would almost be better to just go full populist and get this over with.
Jesus.
So that we,
I mean, it's it's almost it's demoralizing to carry on like this.
And I think that, I mean, the downside, the worrying thing about the ugly scenario is that you're going to start seeing the undermining of independent institutions, the ones that are standing in the way of possible future governance. And I would worry, for example, about the IEC and the election that follows. Things like that, I think we have to be very vigilant about, because in the templates there in other countries, you see eventually it goes to undermining the election outcomes. And South Africa is a very robust, let me just put it on the record. I mean, I think we have a very robust, effective electoral system, but maybe we're complacent and we take it for granted. So do we all know who the chair of the IEC is and what their CV is?
Well, actually, last week we had two people in here from the IEC who were very, I certainly felt better after hearing what they had to say.
Mm-hmm.
Very competent guys, James Apane
and Matsoba.
And Matsoba, they're both in charge of various aspects.
Yes.
Matsoba in charge of party spending, party funding, and he knows what he's talking about, and really spoke very frankly about what they can do if parties don't follow the rules and how the parties have tried in the past to do this. And James giving us very straightforward approach to how elections are run, how much of it is organizational and logistic, how technology has come to bear in these things, and how it's made a positive impact. It seems to me like we're in pretty good hands at the moment.
Yeah. So
I don't know if I've just been bamboozled, but it felt to me like they knew what they were talking about.
We have to protect that. We have to be vigilant and actually. Yeah.
Greg?
I think that President Ramaphosa's citing, and this has been subsequently said by several ANC people, of the possibility of external intervention in the elections is a bit of a warning sign. As soon as you start claiming that some force is out there trying to do you in, and in this instance on account of the ICJ case, it's of course an excuse to start meddling yourself. And I'm not sure whether we've been set up for a declaration that this was not a free and fair election, in spite of the professionalism of the IEC, or whether the government is sort of trying to undo the institutional integrity of the organization to be able to play its own games. But that may be the first warning sign. There is a fourth scenario in all of this, which is we also deal with in the book, which is our kind of PS scenario, which in the good cowboy theme is a fistful of sense. And that's a scenario also not dissimilar to one that we experience countrywide, but at a lower level of governance, where you have pockets of excellence. You still may have an overall narrow ANC victory, but you have most municipalities failing, some provinces, some municipalities succeeding, but you have this environment of rising corruption where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and you may have the devolution of some powers, but overall you have a very pockmarked South Africa emerging, particularly between urban and rural areas, and within the urban scape as well, where you have parts which simply don't get services. But I say not dissimilar to where we are currently, but also under the broader rubric of an ANC victory.
Greg and Ray, you went to a lot of trouble to speak to many people who are well acquainted with the political conditions, the way that voters have behaved in previous elections. Lots of research that went into this too. But the people you spoke to, who were they, and who had interesting insights that you hadn't thought of so far? Because the two of you very well versed in all of this stuff. There can't have been too many surprises, and you posit the scenarios to us. But were there people who really threw curveballs at you and said, people you respect and people you interviewed for the purposes of this book, who said things to you that you hadn't really factored in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a consultative process. It took quite a few iterations to get to where we were with the original scenarios, and then from that we wrote the book. So it was very interesting dealing with Rolf Meyer.
He writes the forward, doesn't he?
Yeah, because he's a kind of really an amazing figure in South African history, to be honest. I mean, he is the person who really made the difference and made it possible for there to be a peaceful transition.
And led the Cadessa meetings.
Yeah. And I think his concern about, how the constitutional order and the constitutionalism is something that's very real and very difficult for a lot of people to really care about. But it's so important, that we made the rules of the game, and we've got to be very vigilant about how those rules are maintained, especially independent judiciary, independent institutions, accountability, transparency by government, and so on. So it was very interesting interacting with him. And I think Greg had some interaction with the sort of master of all South African scenarios, which was Clem Sunter. Maybe you could
talk
about that.
Yeah, no, that's a little like playing guitar with Bob Dylan. Not that I've done that, but that's how I imagine it to be. I mean, Clem is an incredible resource, and so happy to share his background and his knowledge and experiences. And it helped us methodologically, because scenarios are not just about plucking ideas out of nowhere. You've got to have some assumptions about the future, some fundamental kind of laws or rules in terms of, about coalitions, about the relationship between investment and growth, about what sort of civil service you have and the expectations of getting out of it. You've got to have it's got to be grounded in reality. So Clem was very good in providing that methodological outline. I think overall, having a group when you write such a set of scenarios is very useful, because people check you all the time. Fortunately, it's not the public domain, so you don't have to deal with all the celebrationists and virtue signalers, which gets rather tiresome. But what was very helpful was the continual reminder of not confusing goals, ends, ways, the how, and the means, the separation of resources and a timeline in these processes. And I think that's often the failure in any strategic process, which scenarios are part of, is people say, we're going to do this, with no idea about how it is they're going to do that. And that's one, of course, the big mistakes of the South African government, which has been a statement of what it wants to achieve, but with no sense of how it's going to do that and the difficult choices that lie behind that. And that, in fact, is a great metaphor for this book, because if government's about making difficult choices, about difficult choices of policy, of ideology, but also fundamentally of resources, people, money, etc., skills, the most difficult choice of all is who we choose to do that, and that's our choice.
Jack, you want to ask anything about these scenarios? Because I think there's still plenty of questions here. Helpfully, you guys put in a chart here of a kind of four-way split that goes along two axes: more effective or less effective government, and strong economy or weak economy. And there are obviously lots of other factors, but that's a helpful way of looking at things.
I'm gonna ask something like. Maybe I'm going to ask you guys to look into your crystal vase or crystal ball, I guess. If you were to, just from what you've gathered in putting this book together, if you had some sort of an indication, which direction are we headed in? Are we going in the good, the bad, or the ugly?
Yeah. The point about having the four scenarios and not picking one of them is that you can always retrospectively be right.
Yeah.
You don't ruin it, Jack.
Just to get a personal gauge of where they are. You get what I mean?
You want the short and sweet answer.
I mean, I think that there is a big danger of the bad scenario.
Mm.
I wouldn't have said so until 6 months ago or so, when senior ANC leaders started talking, like the deputy president and the Gauteng premier, etc., about how open they would be to working with the EFF.
Mm.
I think before that, the ANC felt very, rightly that they wouldn't be able to handle such a relationship, and that it would end up being. But there is this rising view within the party that that's an option.
When you wrote this, the MK party wasn't in existence either.
Yeah.
Mm.
Which is an interesting
New development. Yeah.
I mean, how does that change any of this, right?
I think if you look at the MK party, I think that there are a couple of scenarios that could play out. I think in KwaZulu-Natal, it could end up in a king-making position, potentially, and that could lead to an ANC victory in coalition with the MK party in KwaZulu-Natal, maybe giving Zuma the premiership or something. So that's one possible scenario. I mean, who are they going to take votes from? They're probably going to hurt the EFF, because I think that a lot of ANC RET types that left the party after Ace Magashule was chucked out probably drifted towards the EFF, and maybe now they'll think, oh well, the colors are the same, so we'll drift back to the Zuma, to the MK party. So I think it's a bit of shuffling of the deck chairs, is what I'm saying. I don't think it really makes, I don't know if it's going to make a big national impact.
Okay.
But certainly KwaZulu-Natal becomes interesting with the MK party.
Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're quite firmly lodged in the kind of fistful of sense scenario. And the real question for me is how do we break out of it? And competitive party politics are part of the answer. They may be, in fact, be the key part of the answer, because accountability and different infusion of skills and ideas, all of this is absolutely crucial. And I think we also have to be fairly realistic about how we get out of this and the sort of pathway up and over. And I think critical indicators are important, and I would believe that that how the opposition coalition does in KZN and in Gauteng is going to be a critical indicator for the next 5 years and beyond. So if we see a strong showing by the MPC, whichever parties it has under its overall skirt, is, I think probably a positive sign that the province could go somewhere else, and ditto KwaZulu-Natal with all of the health warnings that Ray has provided, because of course it's a very uncertain and fluid political environment. How the smaller parties, Rise Mzansi included, Change of Jardines, how they do is part of that. I don't see them making quite the inroads that they say they're going to, but then again, of course, all politicians will say they're going to change the world. I think the fundamental message for me is there's no miracles in politics. There's no messiah. No one's going to change things overnight. And the history of the Western Cape is indicative of that. It takes a long time to turn the ship around, but it can be turned around, and you've got to start that process by getting a different government in place.
Well, I would suggest that you guys have done a lot of the legwork for us. I know Jack wanted you to short circuit all your hard work and give him the answer that would make it worth.
I had to try.
Not having to spend some time. I would encourage anybody to pore over this stuff. You've put a lot of information in here. There's plenty of research, stuff around murders, stuff around the economy, unemployment, the welfare thing that we've got to come to grips with at some point, and plenty of comparative stuff too, around things like what our score in mathematics and science are in terms of comparing us with other countries. And these are also a good indication of whether we're headed in a good, a bad, or an ugly direction. So I appreciate the work that you've done, and I encourage anybody to read your book. It is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly: Scenarios for South Africa's Uncertain Future. It's by Greg Mills and by Ray Hartley, our guest this morning. Thank you both so much, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I hope
Yep.
we'll hear a whole lot more from you as we head towards the election. Clearly, there's lots of interest. Do you think this is the most interesting and important election we've had since '94?
Oh yeah, by a long shot. Yeah.
You agree, Greg?
Definitely. Absolutely.
You agree, Jack?
Yep.
I hope so. I hope we're all excited for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Let's hope it doesn't bite us on the other side of this. But thank you very much for joining us this morning. We will see you tomorrow at 6 a.m. From all of the team here. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.